At this time, we would like to feature a cellist from our orchestra. She has been a member of the orchestra for the past 6 years. She has been a member of the Senior Region Orchestra, the All-State Orchestra, and most recently has been accepted to the prestigious All-Eastern Orchestra, and she will be working with Kurt Mazur in February. Her name is Margaret Ebert, and she will be playing Ashokan Farewell.